All right, we're ready to weave. So there's some spaces between the groups of threads where they've been tied on here, and we want to get rid of those spaces so that all the threads are coming straight. So I'm going to start with some waste yarn. This waste yarn would also include, if you want a long fringe, what the warp that's woven in here will be fringe. If you don't want fringe, you can pull the waste yarn out later. So I have my treadles tied up the way the instructions show. And that means, oh, I have to fix one thing here I just saw. That means that treadle 1 is tied to 1, 3, treadle 6 is tied to 2 and 4, and those are my plain weave sheds. And the other 4 in the middle are tied to 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1, 4. And I can check that without looking below just by stepping on a treadle and lifting shafts. Okay, I'm going to start with plain weave. So my feet are on the 2 outside treadles, and I'm going to throw the shuttle. This is a boat shuttle. The first few times only, I'm not going to beat in between, and you'll see why. So I do first the left treadle and now the far right treadle. And now I'm going to kind of gently beat it down, press those threads down. I'm going to do that same thing again. Left treadle, right treadle, and press this down. And what's happening is by doing 2 in a row without beating in between, it's making those threads get spaced out more quickly. One more time. Left treadle. Oop, I ran out of yarn. Right treadle, I can put that through by hand. Press that down. Okay, and I will take a picture of that. So my goal with this video is to try to replicate what I do in my classes at the beginning of the weaving portion of each class. I'm looking for my bobbin, there it is. And that is just to show you how you're going to get started with weaving. The boat shuttles have the bobbin, they have a spring, at least these shack boat shuttles have a spring. You lift the bobbin out, we're going to put a new bobbin in, doesn't matter which way it rolls, but we stick the yarn through the slot, put the bobbin on, and then I want the slot facing me while I'm weaving. I'm going to start with plain weave, and I'm just going to do what I normally do when I have an audience around me watching, my class around me watching. I'm going to start weaving. I'm not going to worry about what's happening to the beginning of the yarn. Well, I'll show you one way. One way to take care of the beginning yarn is after your first shot through. It's a shot or a pick. You wrap your beginning yarn around the edge thread and take it in for 1 inch or 2. And now we're going to beat. So I'm just going to weave for a minute and let you watch and then talk about it. Notice that I'm not beating it hard, I'm pressing it gently. We have 8 ends per inch on this warp, and I want 8 picks per inch. And if I beat this hard at this stage, the warp is going to completely cover the weft. No, sorry. The weft is going to completely cover the warp, and I won't have a balanced weave structure anymore. My goal with this particular project is to see equal amounts of warp and weft. If you're weaving a rug or something else, a chair cover or something, maybe that is not the goal, and you want to beat it harder, but that should be part of your plan. All right, one of the things I want you to notice is not only that I'm not beating it hard, I'm beating it fairly evenly, but I'm not touching my salvage threads. Do you see that? I'm not touching those salvages. The tendency is to want to go like this with each thread. And see how it slows you down. You're never going to develop the consistency. And ideally, you learn to weave so that your salvages take care of themselves. What I am doing though, is notice my finger on the bobbin. So I'm tugging it just a tiny bit to get it to catch around that edge thread, and then I release it. And my yarn is sort of at an angle across here. That allows, this is a 3-dimensional piece. It's not just 2-dimensional, even though we think of it as 2-dimensional. This weft yarn is going to go over and under the warp as it's beat down. Okay. So there's also a question about, do you beat on an open shed or a closed shed? And different people develop different habits. I can't say what I do all the time. But the important part of this, because most people worry about their edges a lot, and the important part is that little bit, just a slight pull right there at the edge. It wraps it, snugs it around that edge thread, and then I beat. And by leaving a bit of an angle in the weft thread, it allows enough extra weft to go do the over and under thing with the warp. Okay, I'm getting really close to my reed. My best weaving area in this loom is right about here. So I'm going to step on the brake release and use the crank at the side to bring this forward a little bit. So the brake release releases the back beam, the crank winds it forward, then I take my foot off the brake release and crank it down till it's as tight as I want it, which you'll learn how tight you want it. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more plain weave shocks like that. Again, I'm not beating really hard. I'm not beating hard at all, I'm just pressing. Okay, now I'm ready to start my next pattern, which is twill in our lesson. I see one thing I want to take care of first though. The heddles have all shifted. The loose heddles that aren't threaded have shifted up against the warp. What is good to do with those is to take an extra string or a shoelace, and I usually have extras around, which I have to, here happens to be a shoelace, and I'm going to tie them relatively loosely, but I just sneak in between the warp and the loose heddles, tie my shoelace or my extra string just in a big loose bow, but that's going to keep those extra heddles from rubbing up against the edge warps and maybe breaking them. All right, next up is twill, and in our lesson, that's the draft number 2, and it's using the middle 4 treadles. So I step on treadle 2, which is lifting shafts 1 and 2, and treadle 3 is lifting shafts 2 and 3. Step on treadle 4, which is lifting shafts 3 and 4, and I step on treadle 4, which is lifting shafts 1 and 4. Okay, I'm going to do that sequence without talking. Light beat. It's very easy to beat twill too hard because you have fewer intersections, you only have half as many intersections, and it's easy to beat this not even very hard, and it presses that those weft yarns down right on top of each other, and we don't want that. First, before I go on, I need to wind this forward again. Step on the brake release, crank it forward. Went a little too far. If you go a little too far, all you do is you step on your brake release to release it, you wind it back a little ways, and then tighten it up. All right, the next pattern is broken twill, and that is going to be using, again, the middle 4 treadles, but instead of going from 2, 3, 4 to 5, I'm going to go 2, 3, 5, 4, 2, 3, 5, 4. I'm going to change colors just to show you how to change the color. One way to change a color is I've cut off the brown one. I'm going to my next shed, which is treadle 2. I'm laying that in about an inch or inch and a half. I'm taking my new color, and I'm just going to overlap that a little. You want these 2 threads to overlap where they begin and end. These ends will be cut off later. Okay, so now I'm doing my new treadling, which was treadle 2, treadle 3, treadle 5, and treadle 4, again with a light beat. You can always take a ruler or your yarn gauge and lay it on this and count your picks and see, do you really have 8, do you have 10, what do you have? A lot of people get used to weaving, or when they first start weaving, they just get in the real habit of just letting this beater slam down hard. And then it's too dense for the project that we're doing. That's not to say that some projects you don't want it dense. And even maybe if you have the yarn set right and you're making a cotton dish towel, you may want to be beating that pretty hard. But not for this project. I am going to weave the same sequence of broken twill now in the brown. So I cut the white off, and I am just putting one end under the last into the next shed and starting with the brown so that the brown overlaps the white just a bit, and I'll cut those tag ends off later. And then I just start going again in the same sequence. I'm going to do another couple inches of this one. It's interesting to see what the different colors do when you see the contrasting warps and wefts. So I'll do another inch or so of that, and then we'll go on to the next pattern. Sequence, and then we are going to let's see, basket weave. And I think I'm going to start with the white, so that means I'm going to cut this off here. And another way to change yarns is to just, I cut that one off, I'm going to loop it over the edge thread, take it in the same shed that I just wove, and leave it at that. Now I have a brand new piece, no yarn. Haven't started my next one yet. I'm going to lift treadle 2 for the basket weave. I'm sending the shuttle through, wrapping this tail end around the edge threads in about an inch, beat that down. Now on the basket weave, the interesting thing is that it's 2 shots in the same shed, and if I were to stick this back through, I'd be pulling it right out, right? So what I need to do for purposes of a sample, I can just catch that edge selvage thread. In this case, I'm catching 2 because it's easier when they're together. And I go and I just press it down like that. I'm going to do that again. I go through my next shed is lifting treadle 4. I go through, press this down. Now I need to do number 4 again. So I'm just going to go over my edge threads. That catches the warp, the weft, so it doesn't go all the way through. Beat it down. That's how I'm going to do my sampler. Each time I'm going to beat the one thread down, go around the edge, go through the shed again, and press. Do that again here. Sometimes it's over, sometimes it's under, whichever way that thread is presenting itself. Okay, I'm getting pretty close to my beater now. I'm going to do one more, and then I need to advance this again. Don't be afraid to advance your warp frequently. Your weaving will be much better for it. So I'm going to step on the brake release and wind this forward. Sometimes it's a very light tap on the brake release so it doesn't spring too far ahead. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more of the basket weave now. And then we're going to move on to the next pattern. Now, if I were to do this for a whole project, it would not make sense to go around the edge thread each time. But that's where a floating oops, that's the wrong one. What's called a floating selvage comes into play, and that will be for another lesson. But if you have treadlings that don't catch your edge threads well, then a floating selvage can be useful. Although you don't have to catch that thread every single time. Especially with this wool yarn, when it's washed, I can have some places where it's only caught maybe every 3 or every 4, and it's still going to be just fine.